What you're about to hear is a military and scientific secret that has come to light. What lies beneath the ice of Antarctica is terrifying and definitely dangerous. Are you ready to discover what creature is lurking? I'm Darian Montenegro and welcome to tonight's episode. Before we begin, we want to send a very special shout out to the next person who took the time to leave us a great comment. If you also want to be featured here and be an active part of the community, just write us something in the comments of this video or on our social networks. All the links are in the description. Tonight's episode comes via a new email signed by a man who calls himself the Conspirator. For those who don't know him yet, I invite you to review the previous episodes where this mysterious character has already shared information that has left more questions than answers. This time the email begins with a direct warning. Darian, what I'm about to tell you cannot be public, but we must take a risk and bring it to light. The conspirator recalls a meeting he had in 2019. Back then, he managed to bring together in a secluded room two people who had been keeping secrets for far too long. One of them was a former U.S. Navy SEAL with experience in Antarctic operations. The other was a scientist who had been part of one of the most dangerous expeditions ever recorded to Lake Vostok, a place that has remained isolated from the outside world for millions of years under a thick layer of ice. For hours, the two men spoke without interruption. The conspirator listened to them attentively, recording every word. What they revealed were not mere suspicions or personal interpretations, they were facts that they had experienced firsthand. The scientists recounted how they had witnessed covered-up deaths that were presented in official reports as accidents due to hypothermia, but which in reality hid something much more disturbing. He explained that when he drilled through more than 3 kilometers of ice and came into contact with waters that had not seen sunlight for more than 20 million years, something rose to the surface. That something could not be classified by any name within known biology. According to the scientist, what emerged from Lake Vostok was an inexplicable creature, an organism that seemed to have a disturbing level of intelligence and that put the lives of the entire expedition at risk. And although this story alone would be enough to make anyone shudder, it was not the only thing shared in that private conversation. The former sailor, for his part, confirmed that not everything remained in the scientific laboratories. According to him, much darker experiments were carried out in restricted facilities in Antarctica, joint operations between several powers that sought to take advantage of what had been found under the ice. He recounted how he saw with his own eyes bodies mangled by injuries impossible to attribute to known animals and how a soldier completely out of his mind screamed while being held by his comrades as if he had faced an indescribable horror. Both testimonies coincided in one thing. What was found in Lake Vostok did not stop there. It was the beginning of an international operation that to this day is kept a strict secret. What you are about to hear from this moment on is just the beginning of an uncomfortable truth that very few dare to tell. According to the private interview the conspirator had in 2019, the scientist began his story by explaining that the expedition he was assigned to had a single objective: to reach an underground lake sealed for millions of years under the ice of Antarctica. That lake was Vostok, a body of water that had been isolated from the outside world for more than 20 million years. The researchers were convinced that upon reaching it they would find organisms never seen before, a living example of an ecosystem frozen in time. The scientists told the conspirator that drilling was a long and exhausting process. For months, the team worked tirelessly to open a tunnel more than 3 kilometers deep through dense and unforgiving ice. Every meter drilled was a victory, but it also increased the risk. When they were finally a few meters from touching the water, the expectation was total, because they were about to make history. However, at that moment everything changed suddenly. Communications with the outside world were disrupted, radios stopped transmitting, satellite equipment was rendered useless, and the camp was completely isolated. The scientists claimed that the blackout was not an accident but an intentional outage. It occurred exactly when drilling was reaching its decisive point. Days later, 2 of his colleagues were found dead. Official reports indicated that the cause had been hypothermia, but the scientist confessed that he had the opportunity to observe the bodies before they were removed and what he saw did not match that explanation. The extremities showed strange marks, as if they had been held down with an external force, and the skin had irregular cuts that could not be attributed to extreme cold. He told the conspirator that these deaths were deliberately covered up. Superiors demanded absolute silence and forced the entire team to accept the official version. Any doubts or comments were treated as insubordination. Some members abandoned the project as soon as they could, unable to withstand the pressure. He, on the other hand, decided to stay, which allowed him to witness even more disturbing events. That was the beginning of a secret that remains buried under the ice to this day. What happened at Lake Vostok was neither an accident nor a mistake in scientific calculations. It was the first contact with something that should never have been released, and the first victims were silenced under a false report. According to the private interview given by the conspirator, the former U.S. Marine recounted his experience at the McDowell Base, one of the most important complexes operating in Antarctica. There, he claimed, he witnessed situations that could never be officially explained and that to this day remain recorded only in his memory and in documents that have never seen the light of day. The Marine explained that during his service, the bodies of seriously wounded men frequently arrived. What caught his attention was that many of these injuries could not be attributed to natural causes. He said that he observed clean cuts, similar to those that could be made with a scalpel, but in circumstances that had nothing to do with an operating room. They were not conventional combat wounds or accidents typical of maneuvers in hostile terrain. They were marks that seemed to be made with surgical precision in specific places on the body, as if something or someone was dedicated to dissecting these living people. When the conspirator asked him to explain in detail what type of wounds he had seen, the sailor assured that what shocked him the most was that some victims had incisions that did not bleed normally, as if the coagulation had been altered by an unknown substance. On other occasions he saw strange burns around the edges of the cuts, which led him to suspect that technologies or weapons were being used that were never shown to the rank and file. The former sailor also spoke of the orders he received from his superiors. They were contradictory and changed from one day to the next. On some days they were ordered to transfer the wounded with absolute discretion and without written reports. On other occasions, they were required to draw up false documents with causes of death different from those everyone had seen. On several occasions, the official explanations spoke of hypothermia, accidental falls, or attacks by wild animals. But the sailor made it clear that none of that matched the injuries he had observed. One of the memories that haunted him the most occurred during a night when a soldier arrived at the medical area with severe bleeding. According to him, the man screamed uncontrollably while being held down by 3 comrades who tried to keep him still. Amidst the screams, the soldier kept repeating that he had seen something impossible, something that should not have existed. The sailor recalled that his superiors quickly tried to silence him, administering sedatives and forbidding anyone to talk about the episode. However, he could not forget the man's words because they were loaded with a genuine terror that could not be faked. The sailor assured that this was not an isolated case. Several times he heard rumors among the troops of creatures prowling restricted areas, sectors that even military expeditions were forbidden from approaching. He told the conspirator that one of those areas was marked on the internal maps with a special code, accompanied by warnings written in capital letters that prohibited any patrols. That prohibition, he explained, was so strict that not even high-ranking officers dared to question it. Over time, he pieced together the wounded bodies with impossible marks, the orders to keep quiet, the traumatized soldiers who spoke of things that could not be clearly described, and the forbidden areas within the continent itself. Everything pointed to something that should not be known beneath the ice. The sailor confessed that those images haunt him to this day, and that although he tried to leave the past behind, the memory of those screams and those wounds remains fresh in his mind as a reminder that what he saw at McMurdo had no explanation within the parameters of science or conventional warfare. In the private interview, the scientist was direct in recalling what he had seen beneath the ice. He said that after completing the drilling in Lake Bostock, the team expected to find bacteria or small microscopic organisms. That was the official hypothesis and what justified the years of investment in the project. But what emerged from those waters after more than 20 million years of isolation bore no relation to anything human biology had ever recorded before. According to the conspirator, the discovery was an organism that the group began to call 46B. He described it as a creature similar to an octopus, but much larger than expected and with a difference that made it unique. It did not have 8 tentacles like known cephalopods, but 14. Each of these appendages was covered in suckers and ended in a structure that seemed adapted not only to hold on, but also to cut and tear. The scientist said that the most disturbing thing was not its appearance, but its behavior. He explained that organism 46B showed a surprising ability to react to human movements. It was not an automatic response like that of a common animal, but a behavior that revealed strategic intelligence. He said that in one of the first encounters, the creature used a toxic substance that it released into the water, causing the immediate paralysis of one of his colleagues. That man died within minutes. The second case occurred days later when another member of the team was attacked in circumstances that were never clarified. Both deaths were officially attributed to complications from hypothermia, but everyone in the camp knew that the truth was very different. The scientist insisted that these deaths were directly caused by the organism. He said that inexplicably, the creature seemed capable of altering its shape to blend in with the aquatic environment, which allowed it to ambush its detected prey. He described it as a highly efficient predator, something that should never have existed in a closed ecosystem such as that of Lake Bostock. According to him, this biological anomaly could not be explained solely through natural evolution. The ex-Marine reinforced this story with what he had read in classified documents. He assured the conspirator that in some of these internal files, Organism 46B was referred to as a non-terrestrial hostile asset. That denomination, as he explained, was used solely to categorize threats that could not be classified within human biology or technology. For him, this classification demonstrated that the High Command knew from the beginning that what had been discovered under the lake was not simply a scientific discovery, but a threat with an impossible-to-measure potential. The conspirator wrote in his email that upon hearing both testimonies, he understood that he was not dealing with mere rumors. He had before him two men who had experienced firsthand the price of discovering something that should remain hidden. On the one hand, a scientist who had seen two of his colleagues die after confronting an organism that was impossible to classify. On the other, a former Navy man who confirmed the existence of documents in which that same being was described as a danger that surpassed any parameter known to military science. What was born in the waters of Lake Bostock was not just another biological discovery. It was the first contact with something that, according to their testimonies, should not exist on Earth. In the email, the conspirator wrote that as the interview progressed, both the scientist and the former Navy man agreed on a crucial point. What was found in Lake Bostock was not the only discovery. What emerged from those waters sealed for millions of years was just the beginning. The sailor confessed that years after those incidents he had gained access to underground facilities where large cages were stored. There he not only found evidence of containment, but what he described as a veritable breeding ground for creatures known internally as streeters. According to him, the streeters were large, white-skinned predators with bodies designed for housing and with a resistance that surpassed any animal capacity recorded on Earth. The most disturbing thing was what he explained next. These creatures were not completely natural. He claimed that they had been created in a secret program where sequences of human and animal DNA were mixed, and even material that did not come from any known terrestrial organism. The sailor maintained that the streeters were the product of experiments designed to create biological predators that could be used in military operations. Upon hearing the story, the scientist did not deny it. On the contrary, he reinforced it by saying that in the years following the drilling, he had heard rumors within his own work circle about research that could not be published. He explained that the discovery of Organism 46B the High Command saw in this creature an opportunity to manipulate its genetics and apply it to clandestine bioengineering projects. According to the scientist, the same facilities where ancient bacteria from the lake were being researched were turned into secret laboratories dedicated to creating hybrids. The former sailor said that the documents he reviewed confirmed this version. He said that in the internal reports, several powers appeared to be linked to these experiments. The United States, Chile, Russia, and China were covertly collaborating in the breeding of the streeters. Each country had a different interest, but they all agreed on the same objective: to transform these creatures into weapons of biological and tactical control. The sailor explained that the mere existence of a multinational project of this type demonstrated the level of secrecy surrounding Antarctica. One of the most striking details he shared was the description of the containment sites. He explained that these were not simple metal cages, but structures reinforced with several layers of steel and hydraulic locking systems that could withstand enormous force. He stated that he saw with his own eyes claw marks on the interior walls, confirming that these beings had tried to escape on more than one occasion. He added that in certain corridors of these facilities there were security signs that warned of biological danger with symbols different from those conventionally used, as if it were a completely new category of threat. The scientist, for his part, pointed out that this fit with what he had heard from colleagues who deserted the programs. Some spoke of out-of-control mutations and specimens that could not be destroyed with conventional weapons. Others mentioned that the genetic mix included fragments that did not correspond to any species catalogued on Earth, which reinforced the hypothesis that material of extraterrestrial origin was being used. The conspirator concluded this excerpt from his email by stating that the most disturbing thing was not the existence of a breeding ground, but the fact that it was a project that had been planned, organized, and sustained for years. It was not a scientific accident or a laboratory error, but a deliberate operation in which several powers were investing resources. Both the sailor and the scientist agreed that the world had never been prepared to face the consequences of these experiments. The conspirator wrote that according to the scientist, after the first incidents at Lake Bostock and the rumors that spread among the personnel at McMurdo, the High Command decided to take drastic measures. They could not allow the existence of the streeters or the 46B organism to be leaked, so the deployment of a specially trained military detachment was ordered. These men were not part of the base's regular personnel. They arrived on unregistered flights, equipped with heavy weapons, state-of-the-art bulletproof vests, and boxes of supplies that were never opened in front of civilian personnel. The objective was clear: to seal off the underground facilities and contain what had been released there. The scientist said that the mission began with a reconnaissance of the area, but that it quickly transformed into a combat operation. He said he heard constant gunshots, controlled explosions, and internal alarms that had never sounded before at the base. According to him, these creatures were not confined to cages, but had infiltrated ventilation tunnels and service areas, moving with a speed that baffled even the most experienced military personnel. The confrontation lasted for hours, and despite their superiority in weapons, they were unable to completely control the situation. The former Marine reinforced this story with his own testimony. He said that one of his colleagues was devoured on that mission and that no official report was ever made about his death. He explained that the men who participated in that operation were ordered never to mention what they had seen, not even among themselves. The body of the missing soldier was never recovered, and official records stated that he had died in a training accident. According to the sailor, this was the command's way of resolving an impossible-to-hide incident. The conspirator wrote that both witnesses agreed that the operation was not only aimed at destroying the creatures, but also at erasing any evidence of their existence. Part of the detachment was assigned to collect documents, hard drives, and all types of material that could link the project to the powers involved. The scientist claimed that he himself saw how sealed boxes containing sensitive information were removed and how files were incinerated in improvised industrial ovens within the base itself. Another disturbing detail revealed was that at the end of the operation there was no celebration or recognition. There was no talk of victory or mission accomplished. There were only strict orders of silence and a commitment from all participants that nothing that had happened should leave those walls. The scientist recalled that shortly after he was transferred to another destination and that he never received any more official information about what happened at Lake Bostock. The former Marine, for his part, assured that after that night he knew that his career was marked by a secret that would accompany him until the end of his life. The conspirator ended this fragment of his email, stating that the operation ended as all great conspiracies begin, with an imposed silence and with the instruction to forget the unforgettable. What happened in the Antarctic tunnels never appeared in public reports, was never mentioned in scientific conferences or military communiques, and was never acknowledged by any of the governments involved. The email ended with a warning that the conspirator left written with absolute clarity. It said the following: Darian, Antarctica is not an empty frozen continent. It is a laboratory, a testing ground, a prison for beings that should never have come to light. If I tell you this, it is because I know that sooner or later someone else will see it, and when they do, they will remember that this is where the warning began. In this last paragraph, the conspirator explained that the secret kept under kilometers of ice was not an improvised accident. According to the testimonies he had heard at that private meeting in 2019, everything was part of a plan that had lasted for decades. Antarctica, he said, was not protected solely for environmental reasons or by diplomatic agreements signed in 1959 with the so-called Antarctic Treaty. It was protected because beneath that layer of ice there were underground facilities that housed projects that were impossible to publicly admit. The scientist, looking back on his memories, had stated that what was found in Lake Bostock was just one piece of the puzzle. He assured that in other areas of the continent there were facilities intended for similar experiments where organisms of uncertain origin were manipulated with the aim of turning them into control tools. The former sailor confirmed that the restricted areas were not a logistical whim. He said that he himself had seen maps that showed areas marked with biohazard symbols and with the express instruction to keep any human presence away from them. The conspirator pointed out in his email that the most disturbing thing was not the existence of creatures like Organism 46B or the Streeters, but the certainty that multiple powers had decided to collaborate in secret to perfect them. The United States, Russia, Chile, and China, at least according to the documents he managed to compile, were part of a silent network of shared research. No country would ever admit it, but evidence of the collaboration remained in the papers to which the sailor had access. The message concluded by insisting that the silence imposed after the sealing operation did not mean that the project had ended. On the contrary, it is most likely that the experiments have expanded and diversified over the years, extending beyond Antarctica and opening new facilities in other strategic points on the planet. If that is true, the creatures that were born under the ice would no longer be confined to the White Continent, but could be distributed in hidden laboratories around the world. The conspirator closed his warning with a forceful sentence. What began as a scientific expedition to study a lake isolated for millions of years ended up becoming the discovery of a new type of predator. It was not a legend or an unfounded rumor. These were direct testimonies from two men who had experienced it firsthand. For the conspirator, the question was not whether these creatures exist, but when they would resurface again. And that was how the email ended, a reminder that Antarctica is not an unimportant desert of ice, but the epicenter of a secret that remains hidden from the eyes of the world. I am Darian Montenegro, and what you have just heard may be one of the most disturbing stories that I have ever received. Well, we have reached the end of the story, and to close this chapter we would like to thank the following subscribers who took the time to leave their kind comments. We also invite you to be part of our community on social networks. The links are in the description of this video. We look forward to hearing your greetings, experiences, and suggestions in our Facebook group. See you in the next chapter.